Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on the Dairy Signal. We're going to be diving into a topic that sometimes can be a little bit taboo in the dairy sector, and that's talking about our feelings and our emotions. And, it sometimes gets put to the side that that's not important, but we're going to be really diving into compassion, fatigue, and resilience and stress and what that means not only for us, but our employees and how we can maybe build some better skill sets to help ourselves and those around us within times that are maybe a little bit more difficult, or maybe something on the farm is not going quite as planned. But before we dive into that here this morning, or excuse me, this afternoon, I would like to say a big thank you and shout out to our sponsor currently for the Dairy Signal, and that is Your Dairy Checkoff DMI. So a huge thank you to them. And Your Dairy Checkoff is at work building sales and trust in the dairy through restaurant, retail, and food service partners, including youth outreach, research, and product development, and more. So, to learn more, head over to dairycheckoff.com and to see how they're making every drop count. So, huge thank you to DMI for their sponsorship and partnership on the Dairy Signal. I also have to say that if this is your first time catching up with us here in July, you'll notice that things look a little bit different on your end as a viewer. And one of the things that I want to make sure that you still have the ability to do, and that is ask questions. That is one of the best parts about the Dairy Signal is that as a viewer, if you're watching live, you can participate in the interactive portion here. And to do so, it's a little bit different than what you're probably used to. You have to look to the bottom right-hand corner of your screen where there's the video playing, and you will see three dots. You click those three dots, and there it will say ask a question. From there, fill out the information. You don't have to put your name if you don't feel comfortable with that. Feel free to put anonymous or anything else in that section. Type in your question, press submit, and we will be able to see that and ask your questions throughout today's episode. And also, if you're somebody who's looking to maybe get some continuing education credits from the Dairy Signal, that will automatically have a quiz pop up for you at the end. But if you're watching after the fact, maybe you're looking to take the quiz, maybe right before we do a little bit of the ending, you can take that quiz at any moment in time by going to the top left portion of your screen where you'll see three little menu bar lines, and you can click that and take the quiz there. One important thing to note is that after you submit your questions, or your answers, I should say, you'll have to submit one more time in order to make sure you get credit. So make sure you're hitting that button twice. It should be able to be seen and walk you right through so that you can get your credits as appropriately designated. But with all that housekeeping to the side, we are going to get and dive right into the main reason we are here this afternoon, and that is to talk about compassion fatigue and what it means, what it is, and what we can do about it to help ourselves and those around us. And joining us this afternoon is Monica McConkey, who is a rural mental health counselor with Eyes on the Horizon Consulting. So, Monica, thank you for joining us. I know we've had you on before, but it's been a minute. So, would you mind just
It
reintroducing
has.
yourself?
Yes, for sure. I will be happy to introduce myself. As you said, my name is Monica McConkey. I am a farm girl turned farm counselor. I like to tell people. So, I grew up on a farm in northwestern Minnesota. It's currently a fifth generation operation. So, my parents are still very active on the farm. Along with my brother, and then my middle son joined the operation about 5 years ago. So he's the fifth generation. So it's very exciting to see that legacy continue. And while we never dairied, I showed dairy in 4-H. So I showed milking shorthorn calves and bought them from a neighboring dairy farmer, sold them back to dairy farmers, and that was the extent of the dairy experience. But I feel like I've been in that world um, for a good portion of my life. So yes, 30 years ago, I started on this journey of working in the mental health field. And in the last, well, I guess since 2019, I went into private practice and I really focus on mental health and agriculture. So every day I'm working with farmers and ranchers. I'm out on farms, connecting virtually or over the phone. So that is my life in the world of mental health.
Well, Monica, it is truly a pleasure to have you back and joining us, especially as we talk about a little bit more of a tough topic here today. And it's not
Mhm.
always the easiest conversation to have, but I appreciate that you've taken the time to join us here and to really dive into what compassion fatigue is, as well as the tools that we can help build resilience around it. So, I just want to say that if you're listening live and you're somebody who's viewing today's episode, make sure to ask your questions. We'll be taking them
Mhm.
periodically throughout the episode, but primarily at the end. That all being said, Monica, I am going to toss it back to you to get started so we can
Okay.
go through and make sure we get all of the good information we need to feel like we have a little bit more of a toolbox at our disposal when we run into this situation.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Amber. Yeah, let's jump in. So when I talk about compassion fatigue in agricultural audiences, sometimes there's a little bit of a question like, isn't compassion fatigue just something that, doctors or nurses or counselors experience or like first responders? And the answer is no, that compassion fatigue is much broader than that. So I'm going to spend a little time here just describing what it is and how it impacts people. And you'll kind of get an idea of what it could mean for you. So, just a couple of quotes to really describe it. The first is by Dr. Charles Figley. He's kind of the guru of compassion fatigue. And the quote is compassion fatigue is a state experienced by those helping people or animals in distress. It is an extreme state of tension and preoccupation with the suffering of those being helped to the degree that it can create a secondary traumatic stress for the helper. So let's just talk about that for a second before I move on. Think about that, helping people or animals in distress. So when we think about our veterinarians, our vet techs, when we think about people who are euthanizing animals, when we think about calf care workers that are constantly in this place of trying to keep these little babies alive, I mean that can be very wearing. On the same note, if you're somebody working in agriculture and you are helping people who are chronically stressed, who are struggling financially, physically, mentally, emotionally, and you often have built a relationship with them or you know them well, that can start to have this burden that sits on your shoulders that's hard to walk away from. It's hard to separate, like, this is just work. I'm not letting this bleed into my personal life or stay in my mind or impact my happiness. It can be very pervasive because we take on like that suffering that we see the animals or the people going through. So, in short, that's compassion fatigue. So, here's another one that I really like. The expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet. So, if you are working in a stressful environment with people who are struggling, with animals who are sick, it's going to impact you. It can't not in some way. Um, One more quote, and this one really is directed to specifically on the euthanasia side of things, because we know on many of our dairy farms that's part of the deal, right? That there are animals that need to be put down at different times. I've talked to people that work in processing facilities, and depending on who you are, this doesn't always impact negatively, but sometimes it takes a toll. So I just wanted to throw this in here that euthanasia technicians often experience guilt, grief, and frustration as a result of their job. They're also at risk of experiencing a unique type of stress that is not typical in other workplaces. At the same time, workers with euthanasia-related responsibilities often feel stigmatized for the work they do, and I think often livestock producers get that from the general public, despite the fact that they perform work that is often necessitated by pet owner irresponsibility and negligence. So that can go in a lot of directions too. I know that like vet techs and veterinarians deal with that a lot. But if you're on the farm and you are needing to put down animals that are sick or injured, that often can take a toll and doesn't feel good. So hopefully I've kind of encompassed what we're talking about with compassion fatigue. But if you have questions, please, ask the questions because I think it's important that we first, you know, establish a really good foundation of what are we even talking about here. So again, it's really that emotional burden you carry when you're around suffering of animals or people. So what does it feel like? Like, how would I know that I'm experiencing this? Well, it can be kind of tricky because it feels a lot and looks a lot like depression a lot of times. So it may be that just feeling really tired. You may even feel like, I just don't care anymore. You know what? I have lost empathy for the people or the animals. I feel numb. I feel like I'm just kind of going through the motions. That can be a symptom. Um, more anger, irritability than normal, increased use of substances to cope, dread of going to work. You might find yourself calling in sick a lot. Like, I just can't handle it. I can't deal with it anymore. So, we won't go through all of these, but know that it can be really varied. I would say one of the hallmarks of compassion fatigue is we take it into our personal life. So when we're home, when we're with our families, when we're doing things around our home, our mind is on the suffering, the trauma, the stress of work. So,
So,
yeah, go ahead,
Monica,
Amber.
real quick, well, maybe not a quick question, but question is that you mentioned that sometimes it can look like depression. Well, how can you tell the difference when there's so many areas in which they do cross over?
That's a really good question because it could still be depression. Like compassion fatigue can lead to depression without a doubt. I think where the differentiation comes from is just looking at what's causing it. So lots of causes of depression, right? Sometimes genetic, sometimes related to a medication we're taking, often related to just life circumstances, of which compassion fatigue can be one. So it's really kind of tweaking out like what is driving how I'm feeling? What is the root cause that's driving how I'm feeling? And it's often varied because we don't live in a silo where just this causes stress and nothing else in life causes stress. But it's helpful to have a person that you can talk to try to get to the root cause. Like often we know the symptoms of stress, like things that frustrate us, things that we don't like, things that irritate us. But it takes more digging down to find out like what's really driving that. So good question. It can be both. Compassion fatigue can cause depression. So we need to do some little tweaking apart what is the root cause.
Okay, thank you
Good
for that. I'll let
question.
you continue on, but I think that helps
Yep.
differentiate so people can have a little bit better understanding.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's also important to just on the same topic. It's not unusual for people to take medication for things like depression, anxiety, s- things to help them sleep. Um, but which is fine, but if we can pair that with understanding of things I can change in life to make it better, because medication might take the edge off, but it doesn't solve our problems. And so we can be experiencing compassion fatigue. We can be taking an antidepressant, anti-anxiety, whatever. But if we're not dealing with what's driving that emotion, it's only going to work to a certain level. So important to just dive in and get to that root cause.
Definitely an easier sounding thing than it is, but I know we'll get to some other
Yes,
areas here. But speaking of the
yes,
next subject matter,
yes. So I just want to talk about stress because, stress is a pretty global concept that covers a lot of things. Stress isn't always bad. Stress is what gets us out of bed in the morning to go milk the cows. I mean, there's good stress. Um, Typically, what we focus on is the not good stress, which ties right into compassion fatigue. It's that emotion we feel when we are dealing with people or animals who are struggling. So, I just wanted to take a moment to talk through what happens when we are experiencing a stress response. Most of the time, we know there's emotion there. We know we're frustrated. We know we're overwhelmed, but we're not thinking through like literally what's going on. So sometimes that can help. So we're going to talk through stress. And I'm just going to go through a stress response. So the first thing is there's a stressful incident. Let's just tie this back to compassion fatigue. And I'll use an animal example. So let's say our best producing cow um, broke its leg. Okay. So we walk out, there it is, did something stupid, broke its leg. And we know like this is going to be a hit to future, genetics or offspring. This is going to be a hit immediately to production. So there's a stressor. When the stressor happens, whatever it is, there's things that immediately go down in our brain. And you can see this little, if you're seeing the screen, there's a little almond shape part of our brain right around by our ear that's called the amygdala. That is where all of our emotions and memories are stored. So everything that happens to us, that's like a filter it runs through. And if the amygdala is sensing like this is not good, this is a bad thing, this is not going to turn out well, then a signal goes to another part of our brain that pushes it out to our whole body. And then things happen like boom, surge in adrenaline, heartbeat faster, pulse rate, blood pressure up, breathing gets rapid, our senses get sharp, and we release glucose and fats to supply energy to our body. So we're ready to react. This is a life-saving mechanism if it's life or death. If we're having to like run away from a bull, we don't have to stop and think, what do I do? We just run. That's what this is. That's what this does for us. However, if it's not life or death, it doesn't change the response. And that's the downside of our stress response because nowhere in those bullet points is thinking. Thinking not involved. So you can think of it like a teeter-totter. When stress is up here, our ability to think rationally, problem solve, prioritize, greatly diminished. So we're looking for like, we want to manage our emotions so we can keep our thinking brain turned on. Okay. So going back to compassion fatigue, when we are in situations, sometimes every day, where we are helping people who are in distress, maybe we're helping people that have been through a traumatic situation, a farm accident, they're having to sell their cows, there's been a death. Uh, we tend to have our emotions elevate too, which again shuts down our thinking. So we want to be aware of that so we can stay regulated and function in the best capacity that we can. So hopefully that made sense and that just kind of sets the stage for like what's happening inside of us when we're hit with those external things, the people that are hurting, the animals that are hurting, the trauma that's happening. And that takes us to, oh, go ahead, Amber.
I was just gonna say I had a question come in. This one can definitely be held till later, but I think it kind
Okay.
of fits in right now as we go on to the healing portion, but also
Sure.
talking about how our brain works and why it reacts certain ways and how some of us have different interactions with it. But one of the questions here that was written in says, You mentioned that compassion fatigue impacts everyone, but why is it that I see some people I work with have very little reaction when others are impacted to a huge degree on the same incident?
Yes, such a good question because we are all individuals and we bring our personal experiences into whatever we're doing. And so some people, based on past experiences, are carrying trauma or carrying emotion or have very empathetic personalities that when something happens, they are impacted to a larger degree. Where some people, based on history, based on experience, based on personality, genetics, they can be in a situation and it seemingly doesn't bother them. That's a little tricky though, because sometimes it bothers people, but they're shoving it down and it's eventually going to come up. But for some people, truly mentally, they can control their mindset. They're not letting it in. And we're going to be talking about some of that stuff with protective factors. That's another thing. Some people have really built good protective factors around themselves. So they're better able to get through times of adversity. And I'll be explaining protective factors. Some people have other areas of life that are also really hard and they're going through a lot of stuff. And so when something happens at work, it like can put them over the edge. So really good question. I think it depends on a lot of history, a lot of memories, a lot of experiences, as well as just where you're at in life, your personality. And an example is if we think about uh, people who work in a processing facility on the kill floor. Let's just talk about that. They are putting animals down every day, thousands, hundreds, whatever. I mean, a lot of animals go through those places. And I have um, talked with one individual who literally started having psychosis, stress induced psychosis from the amount of trauma he was experiencing in that role. So that's like an extreme of compassion fatigue, where he started to feel like he was experiencing like the animals talking to him, pleading for their lives when they came in the chute. That is someone that does not need to be working in that position. Like he needs to be in a different place in the processing facility or a different job. So he, for whatever reason, he had more of a what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of a vulnerability to seeing that every day. Where other people, I mean, they're just there and their mindset is like, I'm just doing my job. I'm doing my job. I'm doing my job. Like I'm not mentally or emotionally bothered by that activity. Um, most processing facilities now actually recognize that and they rotate people. So you're not there taking the life of an animal all day long every day. Like you're going to be rotating into packaging, whatever. So I think that's another piece where if you have employees, even on the farm, and you notice that they're being very bothered by increased death of calves, for example, maybe they need to be shifted because it's becoming too much. So, yeah, really good question. No great solid answer, but we're so individualized and we bring that into our work. So, different experiences hit different ways.
And Monica, I appreciate you going through the story on the processing plant side of things because I think it puts it into a good perspective. But I also have to say, it really goes to show that it's not necessarily nobody's in the right or the wrong. It's just
No,
the situation that is presented of itself. And I'm going to ask probably probably not a great question when we're
yeah.
in the depths of it here, but when we think about this as well, sometimes when we're on a farm. And it
Mhm.
might not be that you have a lot of employees. It might just be you or you and a family
Yeah,
member, whatever the case may be, where it's you just got to get it done. And
yeah,
sometimes you might be at that point where it's not a great thing to have to do, or you might not be in the best place to do it, but
Yeah.
sometimes something has to be done. So I know that might leading it into some of the discussion of the healing from it, but just from your initial thoughts on there, when you don't really get a choice, how
Right.
does that
Like
play a
you're the
role?
only one. Yeah. And I think recognizing that and not feeling shame in asking for help or support when you need it, even though you're the only one. Is there, and I just remember when I was a kid, I had a 4-H rabbit. And I had this rabbit for years. He was like just loved him. And he got old, he got sick, and he needed to be put down. And for whatever reason, my dad, who'd probably put down many animals until then, he just could not do it. And so he asked my grandpa to come over, who had no connection to this animal, had not seen, me with the animal like dad had. And grandpa came over and put it down. So I think it's good to recognize like if something is really feeling damaging to me, what are my options? And often in farming there is so much isolation and we feel so alone in our struggles that we often aren't, again, we're living in a stress response, so we're often not able to really step back and say, hey, who could come and support me through this, or who can take this burden off my shoulders at least for this time. um, if you truly are the only one and you're going to be in the fight and you're going to have to do the things, then you're really going to want to pay attention to the protective factor discussion we're going to have here, because it's going to be about how do you support yourself physically, emotionally, mentally, uh, so that you can get through these really adverse happenings. And I think about I think it was last summer, there was a big wildfire that impacted a good portion of Western North Dakota. And there were people that had livestock burn and they were hurting and they had to go deal with these carcasses of their animals that they'd invested in. And oh, talk about just hard, but feeling like I'm alone and I have to do this by myself. And so the community really came together to support. And I just love that when we can recognize that there is an emotional component to dealing with this. We don't have to be this, we've got this, we could do this all by ourselves, because it hurts and it does. And getting help and getting support is not a bad thing and does not mean you're weak, does not mean you're failing. Um, it just means you're recognizing that this is like beyond my capacity to deal with, like any trauma is. So,
So I have to say, Monica, the story of, the community coming together for those farmers, we often hear about, when big tragedies happen, that ag really is great about coming together, but it doesn't have to be a big situation. Like
no,
we all know that for the most part have that support system in one way, shape, or form. And whether we like to admit it or not, ag is a great support system. And heck, most of us understand and or have been there ourselves much as we don't
yes.
want to admit it.
Yes, exactly. So tapping into a support system is not a weakness. And it doesn't mean you don't know what you're doing or you're a bad farmer or you're not competent in your job if you work in agriculture. It just means that that's how we're built as people, to have a support system to help us get through. Yeah, very good.
Well, let's move into some of the healing and some of the areas that we can focus on helping us with our toolkits and being maybe a little bit more sturdy around these areas. So I'll let you keep going
Sounds
here.
good. All right. So I love this quote because I think it's so interesting that even like the epitome of helpers, Mother Teresa, right? Dedicated her life to helping. She recognized this and wrote in her plan to her superiors that her nuns had to take a mandatory year off every 4 to 5 years to heal. Now, how nice would that be? If we could just check out, like, this is my off year from farming. So I'm just going to step away. I'm going to relax, read, plan strategically, but I'm not going to be in the fight. It's impossible. But this just tells us the importance of it and knowing that, okay, if we can't step away, then we've got to figure out how to deal with it when we're still in it. And even especially dairy, to take a vacation is sometimes a luxury that can't be afforded for a number of reasons, time being one of them, workforce, finances, all the things. So if we're going to stay in the fight, how do we be okay in that? So that's where resilience comes into play. Resilience is really the ability to go through something hard and not have it ruin us. Like, go through something hard and we get through it and we actually have grown and we're thriving and we're stronger for it. It's kind of like when you first go to do something physically challenging. There's some pain involved, right? But at the end, when you come out on the other side, you are physically stronger and able to withstand more and more and more. Similar concept to resilience for us, mentally, emotionally. So the ability to withstand or recover quickly from difficult conditions, the ability to recoil or spring back into shape after bending, stretching, or being compressed. So when we are faced with difficult situations that are leading to potential compassion fatigue, stress, burnout, uh, resilience is what's going to carry us through. So, how do we develop resilience? We develop resilience by building or boosting protective factors. And just a little note on what that means. Risk factors are things in our life that typically get in the way of us being healthy, happy, and well. So some people are born into situations where there's tons of risk factors. They don't have stability. They don't have basic things like food, shelter. They might be moving all over. There might be domestic violence in the home. They might have health impacts from birth. So they have to work really hard in life, or the people around them do, to implement protective factors. So, what are protective factors? They are the things we build around us, or sometimes are born into, that help us be safe, help us navigate difficult times, help us achieve. So, things like having our basic needs met. We have water, we have food, we have a place to live, we feel safe. I mean, basic stuff, really important. But beyond that, there are things that we need to work really hard on to keep around. I think of protective factors as kind of like bubble wrap around us. And so I'm just going to cover four areas that we can work to build up or maintain, if you already have it in your life, that helps you get through these difficult times, uh, like stress, compassion fatigue, even the daily, just the grind. So the first protective factor I'm going to talk about is spiritual. And when I say that, people think, oh, that you're going to tell me I have to go to church every Sunday. That is not at all what I'm saying. Spiritual protective factors are all about what gives you hope for the future. With compassion fatigue, a lot of times we feel that wearing down internally where we don't see the light at the end of the tunnel and we don't see things ever getting better. So to build our spiritual protective factor, it's like, what am I hopeful for? What am I looking forward to? Like, what feeds my soul? How can I focus on more on that? Like forward, future, goodness. For some people, it is like the very traditional church, prayer, meditation. For some people, it's being out in nature. For some, it's going fishing. For some, it is being around animals. Uh, it's different for different people. But one of the really big things to heal from or to combat compassion fatigue is getting in touch with what that is for you and letting go of the things that are not serving you. So, are there people in your life? Are there thoughts you're having? Is there self-deprecating talk, like you're telling yourself, I'm a failure, I can't do anything right? Is that like pushing down your ability to have hope for the future? So, lots to think about there. And it can look, like I said, very different for different people. Some people, it's like journaling every day, meditating every day, yoga every day, going for a walk every day. Um, it's talking to people that you're close to, friends and family members. It's reading, like I said, praying. So that's a big one. And I think we don't talk about it a lot because there's that, religious aspect, which is really not what it's about at all. So, first protective factor, spiritual. Second protective factor is social. And this is big when it comes to farmers, because again, often we work in isolation. And I will say, when we talk bigger picture, like suicide threat, isolation and loss of hope are two big drivers. So when we talk about building spiritual protective factor, when we talk about building something to hope for, and when we talk about building a good social network and support system around us, two huge pieces of being okay, being safe, getting through difficult things. So, again, protective factor socially is, do I have people in my life that really don't belong here? Like, they're not helpful to me. When I'm around them, it is stressful, it is difficult. I'm giving them valuable time and energy when it's not reciprocated. How can I clean things up, I guess, in my support system so that the people I have closest to me are good, solid, honest, trustworthy people? And this can be hard because on a family farm, you're working with potentially family that you don't necessarily get along well with. Uh, and they're probably not going anywhere. So, how do you set boundaries around them so what they're doing or saying isn't getting to you? So often we just allow the behavior or the words of others to penetrate us. And it's like, we don't have to. Like, we don't have to allow our buttons to be pushed. We can kind of put some armor up, which is like setting boundaries. The other person is probably not going to change. They are who they are. So, what are we going to do to protect ourselves so their words, their actions aren't taking over our thoughts? Because that's typically what happens. If we're irritated with someone, they're doing something, that's who we think about, talk about, give a lot of attention to, and a lot of energy to. We don't have to do that. We can kind of put them to the back of our bus, as I like to say, and focus on the people that are our good, solid support system. Easier said than done. Hard to overcome that. But just think of who in your life is robbing you of energy and how can you reclaim that? How can you put up the armor? How can you protect your buttons so they're not being pushed?
Monica, this is one where I want to stay a second on it because I feel
Yep.
like when you said we've got those family members that know how to push the right buttons, I think we all can agree we know those situations. And, everybody's family situation is different, but
Yes.
when it comes to family, it oftentimes it feels easier to be reactive. because you
Yes.
know, or you think, or you have expectations that they should know or shouldn't be doing this, or whatever
Yep.
the case may be. So, when it comes to maybe building that armor around yourself and trying not to let it bother you, when it comes to family, it sometimes is easier said than done. So, is there
Oh
any
my goodness.
tips or
Yes.
tricks there that maybe might be a good start for somebody?
Yes. So I would say the first thing is remember the teeter-totter. So when you are having some emotion about what somebody else is doing, your rational thinking brain greatly diminished. So when you feel that emotion building, it's kind of like, okay, I need to take a little step back here. I'm only in charge of me. I can't change them. I can't fix them. I can't make them do something that they're not willing to do. And much of the time, I just talked to a farmer this morning that he's talking about working with his son, and he's like, well, clearly yelling at him for the last 10 years has not helped. So why do I keep yelling at him? I'm like, you're exactly right. But you're both your emotion. I'm guessing both of their emotions are up here. So what happens when we're emotional? Oftentimes we yell, we react, or we leave, um, and productive things don't happen. So if you find yourself in a hot in a cycle where your interaction with the person is just not working, what can you change? Because they're not going to change. We can't make them change as much as you want them to. What can you change that's going to alter the outcome of that interaction? And one of the best things you can do is calm and rational. Stay calm and rational. That takes a lot of work if it's something that has emotionally triggered you for sometimes years. So go in with that mindset like, I'm not responsible for them. I can't change them. They are who they are. So the focus is going to be on me. I'm going to work to stay calm and rational. If things are elevating, sometimes I need to take a little walk away, but I'm going to come at problems or disagreements with a problem solving approach. So let's use a dairy example. If you have a cow that's not producing well, typically you would go into problem solving mode. You wouldn't yell at her, you wouldn't hit her, frustration at her, not going to be helpful. It's like, let's go into problem solving mode. How can we make this better? What can we do to support the animal to increase productivity? It's a very similar concept when we're dealing with other people. When we come at them with emotion, usually nothing good is going to happen or nothing's going to change. But when we can sit down in a calm way, be rational, be objective, and problem solve whatever the issue is, it's going to be much better. Many times on the farm, and I talked to another farmer this morning that they and their spouse, not clear role definition. So they're tripping over each other. One's making decisions one day, the other day. It's just not working. And so we're not going to fix that in an argument. We're going to fix that by sitting down and very purposefully making a plan. So again, look at what have you been doing that is not causing any positive change and don't keep doing it. We got to try something else. Uh, the other part I'll say on about that is active listening goes a long way. And that's listening to hear, not listening to respond. So you may be frustrated with that person, but if you can set it aside, hear what they're saying, kind of repeat back or summarize what you heard them say to make sure you got it right. Doesn't mean you're agreeing with them. That automatically brings the emotion down. So let them talk. Okay, what I'm hearing you say is you want this and this and this to be different, or you don't like the way I do this and this and this. Did I get that right? Yep, that's what I mean. Okay, well, let's make a plan on how we're going to deal with this. It's a very different conversation than just being mad sending mean text messages, yelling, that kind of thing.
I
So
have to say,
hopefully that helped.
I think that active listening is one of the biggest key pieces we all can do a little bit better on, or sometimes a lot better on, especially in those situations. And also, it's the reminder that it's not going to change overnight. It's going to take time to
Nope.
remember these skills in the moment, or maybe thinking about what to do differently. But appreciate you walking through that scenario because
Yes,
gosh knows we've all been through it.
absolutely. Absolutely. But how wonderful, like getting back to the compassion fatigue stress piece, how wonderful to be working with family members that are a team. And like we're going to support each other through this. We're going to support each other through hard things that happen. And I mean, game changer for how you're going to be feeling throughout your days. So we had the spiritual protective factor, social protective factor. And this is just a little thing I added to this. There are good days and bad days. This is a quote I got somewhere, but I don't remember where. How are you going to handle the bad days? You're going to turn to someone or something that will increase your level of satisfaction with the work you're doing, not somebody who's going to tell you all the things you messed up, right? Turning to someone or something that reminds you that you are good at what you do and what you do is very important, to remind you of why you are doing this work, and to remind you that the successes and joys far outnumber the failures and setbacks. So it's finding those key people that are going to be your supporters and not just tell you what you want to hear, but give you those good reminders and hear you. And then we have the psychological protective factor. This is a biggie. This is one I could talk an hour about just all by itself. And this is our thinking. Is our thinking forward focused? Is it problem solving? Or is it self deprecating? I can't do anything right. Is it putting other people down? They can't do anything right. Is it a victim mentality? We want to get rid of that. We want to make our thinking work for us versus against us. And nobody can do that for us. So it's all about focusing our thoughts. We have a million thoughts that run through our mind every day. We do not have to pay attention to every one. Hard to do. But if we think about thinking intentionally, like I am going to get focused on where I let my mind go. And I'm not allowing my mind to sit with things that are not going to be helpful or that I have no control over. Like if something comes up, I have no control over it, then it's going to be about making a plan for how to deal with it versus mulling it over in my mind, all the things that are going wrong. Not helpful. So to remember this, this little triangle can be a help. What we think about creates how we feel. So what we think about spurs on our feelings. Our feelings then create how we behave, how we function, kind of how we are in our day to day. And that often reinforces the thoughts we have. So let's just run through this really quick. If our thoughts are around nothing ever goes right, everybody's failing me all the time, I don't have any help around here, how are we going to feel? Probably overwhelmed, frustrated, angry. If we're thinking those things and feeling overwhelmed, frustrated, and angry, how able are we to really stay on top of the business at hand? Like, how able are we to be present in our relationships? How able are we to take the best care we can of our animals? We're not. The ball gets dropped all over the place. And then that reinforces the original thought. This isn't working. I can't do this. I have no help. Things keep getting messed up. And the cycle goes and goes and goes. The way out of that cycle is really through our thoughts. Is it helpful for us to sit and think that I'm not doing anything right or everything I touch fails. Not helpful. And I don't care how many things you've touched that have failed. Obviously, there's a lot of things you've touched that haven't failed. So let's focus on those, right? And make a plan for the things that don't work. So reframing our thoughts that I do have help. Not everybody has failed me. I've had these great workers through the years. I know I can depend on this person. I've done a lot of things right because, hey, I'm still farming. I'm still here. I still have animals. That creates a very different set of feelings, which is going to create a very different motivation level and focus level. So just think about that. We call it the thoughts, feelings, actions triangle. This is huge when we're talking compassion fatigue, because just by virtue of you feeling compassion fatigue, you're dealing with some hard things. So, how can we, through our thinking, really not get sucked down into a place that's kind of a dangerous place to go? Like, I can do this. I have support. I'm going to ask for help. I'm going to, take a break, whatever it is. So remember, thoughts, feelings, actions, triangle. Just a couple additional notes on the helpful thinking piece. We talked about the first two. Three is challenging those negative thoughts. We don't have to believe them. We don't have to take them in. Making a plan really helps because it gets that thinking part of your brain back online. So when you're feeling overwhelmed, things are too much. It's like, okay, I just need to pause and I need to make a plan. I'm going to prioritize. I'm going to look at options. And that's why farm meetings are important, which I know not enough of you have with your family. Uh, Sitting down, having a little planning meeting for the week. It just helps keep that thinking brain engaged, keep the emotional brain calm. Another thing that's really helpful when we're talking compassion fatigue or just dealing with hard things is I'm just going to be in the moment for a bit. Like I'm just going to notice colors around me. I'm going to notice noises around me. I'm going to look at that baby calf and just appreciate the life that's there. So being in the moment. I saw a client recently who said, I'm going to do a better job being where my feet are. Like if we're in the barn milking, I am all in focused on what I'm doing. If we're in the tractor chopping, I'm all in right there, as much as possible. That can help also ease some anxiety. The fourth protective factor, which I realized I didn't put in here, is all about taking care of our physical self. Like, are we drinking water or milk, something besides alcohol, pop, and energy drinks? Are we eating decent foods, especially during the busy seasons? Are we getting sleep? I mean, those things are the foundation for being okay. Um, so starting with that physical protective factor, if I had to start anywhere, that's where I'd start. Get your eating, sleeping, water intake, get those things out of control. Any medical issues you're having, if you're feeling off, go get labs done. A lot of times depression, anxiety can have there could be something in your system that's not at the level that should be. It's the end of July. We need to start thinking about shorter, darker days, colder days. Do you need to start taking your vitamin D in September? I really suggest it. Anything you can do to help your physical self is going to help your brain deal with hard things. So, last little plug here is setting goals, and you've got to be intentional because this doesn't happen automatically and no one else is going to do it for you.
So, Monica, I really appreciate all of the insight that you've gone through here this afternoon, and I don't want to cut you short, but I have
No,
one
that's
question that, you know, this is a lot about what we can do for ourselves, which is really
Yep.
good. And a lot of it, we do need to look internally and do some self-focus. But I'm also thinking about whether you're a coworker, a farm manager, an
Mhm.
owner, what would you suggest, or how can you, as a person who maybe is seeing somebody who's potentially going through something, or be that person that they can rely on, or how do you help? Maybe somebody that you might need help with, out making them feel potentially worse about how they're feeling, being there, being that support system, but knowing that sometimes people don't want to talk about it or not sure how to talk about it,
Yes.
or what do you do as the other
Yeah,
person?
that is such a good question. And I would absolutely not ignore it. Like sometimes we feel like, well, I don't want to make it worse. I don't want to make them uncomfortable, whatever the case is. Um, but we need to, if we're seeing something, we need to address it. And we can address it by just acknowledging to them what we're seeing. Like, I've noticed you seem like you're, not really talking much anymore, or, you're taking more time off, you seem more tired. How are things going? I'm concerned about you. And just leave it with that open-ended whatever. If they say, I'm fine, I don't want to talk about it, I would just continue to check in with them. Like even just daily check in, are you doing okay? You seem stressed, or get their opinion on how things could work differently on the farm. Engage them, I guess is what I'm saying. Keep engaging them, keep engaging them. Um, if you're noticing they're missing work more, they're not showing up, they're drinking more, then I would just have a really serious conversation with them. Like it seems like you're struggling, and we need to talk about this. What's going on? I'm worried about you. Uh, so continue engaging, continue working to build the relationship, continue communicating. The worst thing is just to not acknowledge it and not uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Engage with them. Even though we up here in the north often think that, oh, it's not my business. I don't want to, they call it Minnesota nice, which I think bleeds over into Wisconsin. But we often don't want to get involved. We don't want to whatever. But it doesn't work well. So if you're noticing a family member struggling, you can also um, encourage them to have somebody to talk to. Like, have you talked to the pastor about this? Have you thought about talking to a counselor? I know, and you have people from all over, but every state usually has some program for farm stress. And, look at what is that? What are the options here? So, yeah, I would just say engage, have conversation. Maybe the conversation isn't about what they're going through, but it's just about life. But keep talking, keep them talking.
Well, Monica, I have to say, I think that's one of the areas where I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page, that it's better to talk and have, that dialogue be there, than to wish it was there in the end. So
100%.
So with all of that being said, though, and we've gone through, gosh, so many good tools and tips and tricks, but as we think about leaving here today, what's
Mhm.
like that one or two things that you really want producers to be thinking about or actively doing after today's discussion?
Sure. I would say overall, I mean, we did cover a lot of stuff. When you find yourself kind of lost in emotion where everything seems overwhelming, it's too much, and you're starting to feel the impact of that mentally, physically in your relationships, really just take a step back and get that thinking brain engaged and look at what needs to change here. I mean, this is a tough area you're working in. Lots of unknowns, lots of uncontrollables, lots of risk. So, what are the things you have control of, and how can you put your energy and focus into those things versus the things that are out there that you can't maintain or you can't control. So really taking a step back, calming things down, looking at things more objectively and just seeing um through the emotion, I guess.
Well, Monica, I have to say, as always, I appreciate your time here. Not only
Yes.
do you provide a lot of resources, but you also have a lot of experience in agriculture and being able to speak with some of those anecdotes that really help shape and put it into perspective. So appreciate you so much, and your time this afternoon.
Thanks, Amber. Good to be here.
I also want to say thank you to those who asked your questions, as well as if you are somebody who is wondering what is going on in the world of professional dairy producers, maybe what's coming up next week on the Dairy Signal. You can find all of that and more by heading over to our website at pdpw.org. Also, a huge thank you once again to DMI for their support of the Dairy Signal. But for now, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you here next week. Bye now.